Hello, and welcome to Bookish and Unbalanced, the podcast that tells all about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful of mental health in the queer book community. I'm Adrienne J. Smith,
I'm Amy Spencer.
And I'm Katie Trapp.
and we all have a state of mental health, and we neglect to talk about it, or worse yet, we're ashamed to talk about it. So we're going to break that stigma. Today's episode is a host-only episode, and we are kind of interviewing each other. And we're talking all about coping skills and coping mechanisms, which is more a do as we say, not as we do kind of topic. So just for quick check-in, how's life going?
Getting ready to celebrate my anniversary.
Oh, nice. That's a
What number
nice
is
thing.
this?
4 years married, 6 years together.
That'll be fun. And you're writing a book?
I am writing a book.
Are you sure? How's that going, Katie?
It's going pretty good. I've hit that point when I start to try to write just a contemporary romance where I go, is this even interesting? Like, is there anything that really is like, what are we doing here? So I don't know.
No,
I struggle with that a lot of times.
nobody's died yet.
No, and I don't think anyone is going to. So this will be the first one.
So you've took out the kind of fancy aspect of it. You've took out the murder of it. I mean, it's almost like it's not a Katie Trapp book at all. Like, what's going on?
I know there's no magic, there's no murder. It is just two
Oh my God.
people,
It's
I don't know,
real
falling
life,
in love or
Katie.
something. See, that's the problem. That is the problem. I like to read to escape.
So you want to escape into murder?
I like murder documentaries to be very soothing. You know, I'd ever just put those shows on the background and
I do.
You're
I
the
know I'm not
people
alone
who
on that one.
You're the people who have that internet thing when they say that Netflix and chill is actually just putting on a true life, like a true crime documentary, and actually sitting on the sofa together.
I do. I put those on. I like to watch them. I like to watch more like the cultish documentaries, though. The masses, getting the masses to do crazy things. What's new with you, Ames?
I'm sure something must have happened. It's run up to some more holidays here, though, isn't it? Like I know you're already on some holidays, but yeah. So it's been a bit hectic making sure that we've got childcare cover for the next like 6 weeks.
Oh, that's right. School is coming to an end over there.
School is coming to an end.
Do you have one more week?
No, we've got a couple more yet. They don't break up until like the middle of July. So we've got a few more weeks left, but no one learns anything this time of year. They're not doing anything. It's the time of year as well where I'm doing things like have to take time off for sports day so I can see my child throw a beanbag into a hoop 6 times and run down the field. But summer has finally arrived here. We've got some sunshine now, so that's quite nice. It'll be gone by Monday, but nice now. But nothing else has happened. It's been very quiet here.
Well, you shouldn't have said that.
Yeah, you shouldn't have said that. And what book are you working on, Ames?
I'm working on a contemporary romance, and I don't think it's getting boring. In fact, it's just got to the good part because I've done all the nice stuff, and now I'm going to rip them apart and give them some angst. So I'm in my element. Making people cry, making people hurt, but the promise of happy ever after at the end of it. So, that's nice. I don't mind like real life. I don't mind writing about that stuff. It's not boring. Just need to find out what trauma your character's gone through and pile it on. Once you've figured that out, it's fine.
What about you, AJ?
We are full blown into summer. I've got one kid gone for 3 days at church camp. And I just got a picture of him. One of my congregants is is a counselor there, and so they're sneaking me pictures. So I just got a picture of him taking his swim test, so he can swim in the pool. So he seems to be having a blast. And then the other one was helping me paint a room because my life is all about refinishing my basement and not spending all summer refinishing my basement. This is my goal. I would like to get it done before the end of June, which is not going to happen, but maybe the second week in July. I say that because I'm gone for the first week of July. If I was home that week, it would be a different story. But we got Spidey's room painted. And then I will tear up the carpet and prep it for the flooring, which comes on Tuesday, so that I can start on the flooring. And then do the flooring in the playroom, and then do sister's room. This is my life.
Fun.
Yeah, so before we got on this call, I had to go do a quick scrub and make sure I got all the paint off, because I did have some beautiful paint across my cheek. But in terms of books, I am diving into Follow My Lead, not Follow My Lead. I am diving
No, you
into
that one.
finish that one. It's with the proofreader. I'm diving into Battle Fluke that I'm co-writing with Neen, that comes out in January, and then also and that one's outlined. It's ready to go, so it should be pretty easy to write.
Oh,
No,
spanner in the works there. That's like me saying it's really quiet at the moment.
I know. So, and then I'm diving into outlining and writing my solo book that comes out in October, because that's not short notice.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it for a really long time, and I think I'm going to name it Imperfectly Perfect. So I switched it around. Originally it was Perfectly Imperfect. I think it's going to be Imperfectly Perfect. I'll decide when I have to get the cover. Which I should probably do soon, because August is coming, or October is coming up quick. But that's pretty much what I'm doing. So we're talking about coping styles and mechanisms today, which self-admittedly, we're not always the greatest at, and I think anybody can say that. They're not always the greatest at that. But what do you guys think is the difference between self-care and coping mechanisms? Because we've talked about self-care. And when we were listing off some stuff, some of it sounded more like self-care than coping skills. So what do you guys think is the difference? Great talk. So to me,
Yeah. It's like, I felt a little bit like when the teacher calls on you in class and I'm like, I know the answer to this. And yeah, the minute I can't even remember my own name, I'm sorry.
it's the advantage to being the one to ask the questions. To me, I think,
So tell us. Tell us, AJ, what's the difference?
Well, my opinion of the difference, who knows if this is correct or not, is that self-care is more like the action and coping skills is more like the process undergirding the action, if that makes sense. So like self-care is I'm going to go take a bath and clear, or in my head, take a shower and clear my head and kind of pull myself together. Whereas the coping skill, the process between underneath that is the meaning making of whatever it is I'm trying to cope with, the emotional centering and calming down, and those kinds of things. So I think they kind of go hand in hand, which is probably why I'm so opposed to the term self-care, because I think there's a lot more to it than what people generally think. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Coping skills feels more like in the trenches, like in the moment, and self care feels more preventative. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like if I'm just bogged down and stressed, and I need to take a moment in the moment, that feels more like coping skill usage than after work doing something that uplifts me or, like you said, clears my head.
I guess it's in the name, really, isn't it? Like, if you think about it, if you're just coping with something, you're just managing to make it through. Like, you're just getting yourself to the next moment. While self-care is, much more I think, the end goal in being able to manage long term and just continue. And I think we don't really necessarily, this is the most obvious statement I think I've ever made. We don't necessarily get the balance between the two, right? Like, I'm like just cresting a wave of coping mechanisms and never quite reach in the self-care stage sometimes. Like, I'll just constantly be like hopping from one to the next. Do you know what I mean? And I think that leans more to, again, the conversation which we've had before, which is it's really easy to say that you need to make time for yourself and, take the bath and take the walk and do those long-term kind of carving actual time out to do those things. It's much harder to actually do that. And probably easier for some people and easy to say for some people, to say do that. But actually I think there's probably a really high proportion of us who are just living day by day on the coping mechanism side rather than the self-care side. So I'm going to have to say that a lot this episode, and I'm going to have to stop rolling my eyes every time I do it.
You're rolling at your eyes at yourself though, right?
Yeah.
I think I don't think that the balance is 50-50, and I kind of want to make that clear, right? I don't think that 50% of the time should be spent on self-care and 50% of the time spent on coping mechanisms. I think the balance is much more skewed toward self-care. And if we're doing self-care well, then we need less coping mechanisms. Right? Because we already
and healthier coping mechanisms.
Yeah, we have those systems in place to kind of help us get through those upticks in stress and worry and all of the deadlines looming and happening on the same freaking week. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Not starting 2 books, ending one, and redoing my basement in 1 week at all.
And how are you coping with that?
Actually, really well. I enjoy painting. Painting is very cathartic to me. So I was very excited when my kids decided they wanted to paint their rooms again. I was like, yes, I get to spend hours just in a room by myself painting away. I love painting. I know. And honestly, I think the flooring is going to be the same way once I get it figured out and going. So I'm actually looking forward to it. I really like doing home improvement projects. So we should probably talk about maybe when a healthy coping mechanism becomes an unhealthy one. I think of this frequently with my husband, and I am going to throw him under the bus a little bit here. One of his coping mechanisms is video gaming, which is fine, you know, like that's a great coping mechanism. It's kind of just like taking a shower, right? It takes your brain out of things. But when it is used too much, right? You can start to avoid the problem and dealing with it. And all of us can fall into that. That's just the one distinct example that comes to mind. For me, it's cleaning. I will deep clean my entire house before I want to deal with a problem sometimes. So what are your guys' opinions, I guess, on preventing that or being aware of kind of when we slide from using a skill, a coping skill in a healthy manner to it no longer being healthy?
I think it's like
I
what you
don't,
said, the avoidant part. Like if you're using it to avoid things instead of using it to, I, I don't know, like maybe work through a problem or de-stress or whatever. If you're doing it to put things off, which just continuously starts building up more and more problems.
I think sometimes it's really hard to see that as well, because you will. But I'm a bit like AJ in that I'll find something that he's doing in the house to cope, and then I'll use it as an excuse because it needs doing in the house. And I think sometimes like it's really easy to then like fall into that trap of using it too much and using it to avoid and using it as an excuse. I think with some coping mechanisms, it's really easy to tip over into actually you're not doing it to really cope anymore. You're doing it as an excuse to avoid the problem. And um yeah, I think that's a really difficult thing to also see yourself, because I think sometimes you get so much into your own head and you get so like into you can lose sight of what you're actually using it to cope with that you kind of then don't even realize that it's a coping mechanism anymore. It stops being a coping mechanism, but you forget that it was started as a coping mechanism. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the whole point of a coping mechanism is actually to avoid the problem for a little bit of time,
For a little bit of time.
right? But that's the thing, it's a little bit of time. And then when that time becomes too big is when it becomes unhealthy. Because I think it's very reasonable when you're insanely upset, when you've been triggered by something, when you're in the middle of an argument, to be okay with saying, I need 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour to cool my shit before we go back into this conversation or before I go back into dealing with it. Like I need to collect myself, I forget the term that my therapist used, but in terms of like she has me rate myself on like a activated scale, like 0 to 10, like how activated I am. And I can't do any good work if I'm super activated. And so I need those coping skills to help bring me down. But again, it's that short period of time. And if it's when we let that time get too long, and there's no definitive of when is too long, which sucks, right? Because sometimes it can just be 5 minutes, and sometimes it needs to be an hour, and sometimes it needs to be a day or two. If not, I want to say it could be longer. My therapist would probably come back and say, no, that's too long. But I would like it to be longer sometimes. But the whole point being, a coping mechanism is to help you avoid the intensity of the emotion that you're struggling with for at least a brief window of period.
I know when I started looking into codependency, like it amazed me at how much people who are codependent will use everything around them to avoid feeling or working on whatever it is they need to do. So they start taking on these tasks that they should say no to. And they get it in their heads that, no one else can do this the way I do it. If I don't do this, then it's not going to get done. And it's just, you're accepting a lot of, like responsibilities or practices that you don't have to do. And it's okay to say no to.
Feeling very
And
called out right now.
I, man, when I read Codependency No More by Melody Beattie, I had to do it in chunks because it hurt so bad. And I realized that I was like, I was taking away from actually other people's responsibilities because I was taking on their responsibilities. So I don't have to focus on what is wrong with me. And just, I don't know, it's once you start looking at those, it's honestly almost painful at how far you realize that you'll go to avoid. It's something. It is something.
I really don't need to pay for therapy. I just need to do this every week. Thanks, guys.
I highly suggest reading the book. It's so good. It hurts so bad, but when you realize how much, like, I had a very difficult time deciding um, what is actually my responsibility and what is other people's responsibility, and telling people no and saying I don't have time for that, and learning that I'm not the only person in the world that can do something. That was rough.
Yeah, to me, some of that switch was I'm not going to make time for that. Not I don't have time for that, but I'm not going to make time for that because I can always make time for something if it's really important. But to be able to distinguish the difference between what I'm willing to make time for and what I'm unwilling to make time for. And I pull that card on my kids frequently when they start whining about whatever. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not making time for this sibling argument. I'm not refereeing it. You guys can figure it out or you can stop. And I think that's a really benign example, but that comes with setting boundaries of you need to figure this out on your own. It is not my responsibility. It's not my job to do that for you. And I tell myself,
Is really good at that too.
I know, I tell myself it's being a good parent doing that because then they have to figure out skills on their own, right? Maybe. Learning conflict management skills, right? I'm not hearing a bunch of yeses.
They've got to learn.
I'm dealing with my own revelations over here. I can't now talk about your kids as well.
Is your mind still like blowing up?
Every once in a while we do one of these and then I sit there for like the next, I don't know, God knows how many days. And I'm just like, well, that was fun. Thanks for that.
You're welcome. I spent a very long time learning to say no, and it probably took over a year or two to be able to stop and is this my problem? How is this helping me right now? Is this something I need to be doing? And just realizing that a lot of times it's not.
I think that's hard too when you're in a caregiving profession. Because your job is literally to caregive. And so it's like these innate skills that you have. And then you add in being a parent and being a spouse and you're supposed to care for these people, but sometimes you have to care by saying no. That's really hard too. But I mean, I struggle with that in my day job, just saying no and not allowing myself to be triangulated in arguments, which is a whole family systems theory thing. But yeah, making sure that I don't essentially become the parent that has to negotiate between two people, unless it's like really bad and they're like gonna kill each other or something. I don't know. I have seen fistfights break out in a church, so in which case I would step in.
And when we do things for other people, like you said, when you're in those situations, a lot of times like you're taking the independence away from the other people in the matters too. Some like in mental health, when I was a case manager, I would find myself doing things for the clients that they needed to do because it was easier for me to do them myself. But how are they going to learn to find resources and call and do this and that if I'm taking away their ability to learn and to be independent instead of just guiding them through or saying, no, here's the tools you need. You can do this on your own.
I mean, it's easier for you to do it as well, to be fair. It's just not healthy.
It's not fair to them for me to take on. You make people weak when you start taking away their abilities to do things.
Yeah.
Because then they become dependent on you.
They're less resilient, aren't they? Because the thing is, then when they do, if you've, guided them with a heavy hand through every single step of the process, at the end of the process in this particular situation, is hopefully, the idea is that they come out the other end self-sufficient and, not with their, whatever their traumas or issues or whatever, being so prescriptive over their life and their choices and things like that. But actually, we're not doing them any favors by doing that, because at the end of the day, they're going to come out the other end of the process and they're not going to know how to then navigate the next problem because we just navigated it for them.
Right. And then getting irritated when they don't do it, they try to do it, and it's not the way that you've done it, or, you feel irritated by those moments where they're trying to take those steps.
So according to the NIH, there's 4 styles of coping. You have problem focused, emotion focused, meaning focused, and social focused. And all of them are different, and I think all of them are kind of intertwined with each other. But I think all of them are equally important to have within our lives. I mean, just thinking back on the episodes that we have done, we have talked about, I think, almost all of them, except maybe meaning focused. Pretty explicitly, meaning focused being, this is the meaning that I'm making from this event or this thing or this feeling. Which is something that I'm actually really good at doing, shockingly, is choosing the meaning that I'm going to take from something that has happened and making my own meaning from it. The other ones, those are questionable. But of those 4, meaning is probably the one that I'm most decent at doing. I don't know, what do you guys think? I think most people talk about like problem focused coping mechanisms, right? When there's an event or a trauma or an argument, like that's kind of you're solving the problem that has happened. And I think we talk less about the emotion and meaning. And then everybody talks about social, go out with your friends.
Or get drunk on Zoom.
Katie, would you like to elaborate more?
Yeah, would you like to tell our viewers and listeners what you mean exactly?
Our sprinting session just basically turned into, I don't know, shooting the shit.
We did get 2 sprints in
We
We
did
did.
in 4 hours.
in 4 hours. They're 30-minute sprints. But I think, all 3 of us have been under a considerable amount of stress lately, and I think it was needed. It's one of those social things,
It was needed.
those social coping mechanisms. So when our spouses get mad at us for staying up late on Zoom, we can tell them we're just socially it's a social coping mechanism. It's fine. It's
Social
good.
coping.
Healthy.
I'm sure that'll really go down well next time I use that one.
This is mental health care.
My husband and I actually had that discussion because that's not the first time I've done like a Zoom friend meetup. I've done them before with other friends, and I've done them before with other authors. And I think the first time it lasted like 4 or 5 hours, and my husband was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" I was like, "Yeah, but if you think about if we were to leave the house and go to a restaurant or a bar, it would be that same amount of time. The only difference is I'm doing it in my office on my computer, and I'm not going anywhere. And it's the same kind of
And I'm in my
concept.
pajamas. Like, that's a really key part to this Zoom socializing, is I don't have to, I can wear my pajamas. It's much better.
And the drinks are cheaper,
Yeah.
and I can be comfortable. Anyway, but it's that same social coping mechanism thing. And I think with COVID, it really lended to that kind of online sphere. I think too, as millennials, we're kind of caught in this, we're not as online as some of the younger generations. But we can still utilize and see the massive benefits of technology and being online and in the sphere of online. Like the 3 of us have never met in person, and yet we talk all the time and we rely on each other socially. So, I mean, there you have it. The internet is not bad, folks. And by folks, I mean boomers.
I can't hear that word now without hearing it from the book. Your
And
book.
don't quit your daydream.
Oh,
Hearing the way that
Okay.
that Lori says it.
It's narrated in my head by Laurie Prince every single time now.
Okay, boomer.
Every single time.
That was a fun tease between the characters for sure.
I think like I think society as a whole are much more aware of what and maybe this is a good side to all those, internet social media posts which we berated in a previous podcast about self-care. The positive thing is that society is now very much kind of, I think, starting to embrace these healthy coping mechanisms much more than we used to. And they're kind of becoming a little bit more like the norm. They're not totally the norm. It's far easier to, reach for the wine at the end of the day than it is to journal my thoughts away. But like, I think we are kind of starting to accept that I mean, we all knew that they were the better way to go about, but like, accept that the hard work is worth it. Yeah, I know the irony of me saying that. But I think we're definitely like, there's definitely been a shift in recent years, and maybe that's a generational thing as well. Like, we're shifting towards not falling back necessarily on, the old favorite ways to cope in an unhealthy way. And yeah, maybe that's a little bit more to do with that kind of, openness and more awareness of self-care and mental health and everything that's around it, which is out there on social media. See, another good thing the internet's good for.
Yeah,
I think
I'd
it's
agree.
also not as like secretive now. Like it's a little bit more out there. We're not hiding behind doors, not wanting to talk about the hard moments. It's a little bit more socially acceptable to do that.
Like, it's very odd to find somebody in my world that is 40 years old and under that has never been to therapy. And talks openly about it. Like, oh yeah, I went to my therapist the other day and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, all right.
I think we've mentioned this before, but I think that's still very much like a cultural thing in terms of that is not a conversation which would happen in my day-to-day life over here, apart from, with
I think,
you.
yeah, I think too, just in my world, because I am in that that care world, right? So because my colleagues are clergy, and so we're very much in that sphere of, if you're a caregiver, you also have to make sure that you're being cared for. Like, I have 2 separate small groups that I meet with, and every single person in those small groups has therapy at least once a week. Some form of therapy. So it's, I think that just might be it too. Do we have any last minute comments on coping mechanisms and skills?
Yeah, I'd like to say that even mine are still rubbish. They're much better than they were, and you should all be proud of the progress that I've made anyway. So I'm going to go deep clean my bathroom later on and think about it really hard.
Do that. Just don't
Thanks
deep
for
clean your bathroom for weeks.
Yeah, come back to the next podcast and find out how that's going.
Yep.
Just end
All
this one
right.
with like a to be continued, and we'll just see how the.
Well, we record again in what, 4 days?
Yeah.
So, 3 days, not including today. So we'll see if you're still cleaning the bathroom in 3 days. All right, so that's all for our latest episode of Bookish and Unbalanced. We would love to thank everybody for tuning in today, and getting to know us and talking about coping skills, whether we have them or not. So be sure to hit like and subscribe buttons to keep up to date with our latest episodes. And until next time, take care out there, and remember that we are all in this together.